Good evening. I rarely get to say that to you. This is a rare opportunity for us to gather in this season where, in our part of the world, in our hemisphere, light and dark are coming into balance, complementing one another. In this season and in this time of day, when we are coming into twilight, as our hours of daylight are giving way to night. In this season where we begin our Easter celebration as our Jewish brothers and sisters begin their Passover celebrations. We gather in this circle with one another in this space and welcome each other as we take our place, and welcome those who join us wherever you find yourself and are tuning in and being with us online. This is a time for us to gather in the early evening, in the twilight, in a reflective time of day, to think about our passion for life, to think about our passions for justice, to think about what it is we do with our anger and our rage at what is, and with our hope and our dreams for what could be. And so we take our place in this circle with each other in gratitude for this land in which we gather, this storied land where we have come from all over the world into the traditional lands of the Cree peoples and the Métis people of this land. As members and partners in Treaty 6, seeking reconciliation with one another, seeking a better way to be with one another as we move from our harm and our hurt toward healing. This is a time that we must rise into our hope and into our possibility. And so we sing ourselves into this gathering.
The story that has us marking this night is one of anger, plotting, betrayal, scapegoating, expedience, and violence. It's a night to ponder all the many things that stand in the way of peace. Being on a spiritual journey is like traveling on a road toward peace. We're seeking it within us as a sense of tranquility. We're seeking it in our relationships, lived out in harmony with each other. We're seeking it among our world's nations and factions, in the ceasing of war, the laying down of weapons, and the embrace of goodwill. As Terry Waite, Special Envoy to the Archbishop of Canterbury and 5-year Beirut captive, has said, peace is rooted in love. It lies in the heart, waiting to be nourished, blossom, and flourish until it embraces the world. Tonight, we light this candle for life's journey toward peace, often thwarted by our stubbornness, our anger, our fondness for dualities and easy solutions. We light this candle for a different vision of peace that flows from love, and the countless examples of that love being lived out in our ordinary and everyday living. We light this candle for the hope and the path toward peace. So, we place our voices together and strengthen our intention to focus our attention and to open ourselves to this time together. It is surprisingly easy for the world to silence opposition, cover up resistance, and use power as a weapon of control. In the witness of passionate and courageous love, we honor the voices that speak in resistance. We honor the actions that demonstrate truth to power, and we honor the quiet and courageous who seek to build a culture of justice and peace. Amid the dark memory of violence, which this day remembers, may we be driven deeper into our longing for wholeness, for all that's in danger and wounded in our world. May we live the revolution of loving action, which Jesus of Nazareth embodied in his life and in his death. May we be inspired to find ways to act and live for peace. May it be so.
More than 50 years after Jesus of Nazareth was executed by the Roman Empire, these words were written about the events leading to that act of violence. From Matthew's Gospel. Judas, one of the 12 disciples, came, and with him a great crowd came with swords and clubs, alongside the elders and the chief priests of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Seize him." And he came up to Jesus and he said, "Greetings, Rabbi." And he kissed him. And Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you came to do." Then they came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. And at that moment, one who was with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. And Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back in its place. For all who take the sword will perish by the sword." At that time, Jesus said to the crowd, "Have you come out to us as if I were a bandit? Have you come with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you didn't lay a hand on me. But this is your hour." These are words from a first century community.
The following video is an excerpt from a TED Talk given in Vancouver about 3 years ago by a man named Kailash Satyarthi. Born in India, still lives in India, a child rights activist, recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize, and giver of wisdom. This is an excerpt from that TED Talk, and it's about 5 minutes from a talk that was about 16 or 17. So this is some of the heart of what he has to say.
Today, I am going to talk about anger. When I was 11, seeing some of my friends leaving the school because their parents could not afford textbooks made me angry. When I was 27, hearing the plight of a desperate slave father whose daughter was about to be sold to a brothel made me angry. At the age of 50, lying on a street in the pool of blood, along with my own son, made me angry. Dear friends, for centuries, we were taught anger is bad. Our parents, teachers, priests, everyone taught us how to control and suppress our anger. But I ask why? Why can't we convert our anger for a larger good of the society? Why can't we use our anger to challenge and change the evils of the world? I was an engineer, an electrical engineer rather. And then I learned how the energy of burning fire, coal, the nuclear blast inside the chambers, raging river currents, fierce winds, could be converted into the light and lives of millions. I also learned how the most uncontrollable form of energy could be harnessed for good in making society better. My anger at the age of 11, when I realized that how important is education for every child, I got an idea to collect used books and help the poorest children. I created a book bank at the age of 11. But I did not stop. Later on, I co-founded world's single largest civil society campaign for education, that is Global Campaign for Education. That has helped in changing the whole thinking towards education from the charity mode to the human right mode. And that has concretely helped in reduction of out-of-school children by half in last 15 years. My anger at the age of 27 to free that girl who was about to be sold to a brothel has given me an idea to go for a new strategy of raid and rescue, freeing children from slavery. And I am so lucky and proud to say that it is not 1 or 10 or 20, but my colleagues and me have been able to physically liberate 83,000 child slaves and hand it over back to their families and mothers. Anger, idea, action, which I tried to do. Anger is a power, anger is an energy, and the law of nature is that energy can never be created and never be vanished, can never be destroyed. So why can't the energy of anger be translated or could be translated and harnessed to create a better and beautiful world, more just and equitable world? Anger is within each one of you. And I will share a secret in few seconds, that if we are confined in the narrow shells of egos and the circles of selfishness, then the anger turn out to be hatred, violence, revenge, destruction. But if we are able to break these circles, then the same anger could turn into a great power. We can break these circles by using our inherent compassion and connect with the world through the compassion to make this world better. The same anger could be transformed into it. So, dear friends, sisters, and brothers, again, as a Nobel laureate, I'm urging you to become angry. I'm urging you to become angry. And the angriest among us is the one who can transform his anger into idea and action. Thank you so much. Thank you.
These are words of inspiring and transformative anger. May we find wisdom for our living. The stories and the themes of this night within the Christian tradition has something to reveal to us about our long march toward peace. And perhaps the most glaring piece of wisdom that it shares is that it's not a straight path. We've heard it said that peace begins at home. That if you don't have peace in your being, an inner tranquility, then it's impossible to bring peace to your relationships, to your communities, by extension to the world. Also, though, I've heard more than one person tell me that there is no way that they could have peace of any sort when they were living in, for example, a corrupt and warring nation, where every day was a test of physical survival under threat of death. For them, in their stories, the only way to personal peace was by removing the external threats to every other kind of peace. So this peace thing goes both ways. It's not one then the other. It's not a straight path. It's not a simple equation. We are all on this path toward peace, working at it from our own angles, from our own lives, from our own circumstances. And we all want to see it happen. We want to see peace happen as intimately as within our own emotions and our very bodies, to feel that sense of tranquility. But we also want that peace as far away as Somalia or Gaza or South Sudan or Syria or Afghanistan, and everywhere in between. We're all walking this switchback trail together in one way or another. Now, the story of this Good Friday in our tradition sees the arrest, the trial, and ultimately the execution of a man whose political, economic, social, religious teaching threatened the abusive and unjust power structures of the time. I don't know if you're like me, but I've attended plenty of Good Friday church services in my life that have read, sometimes reenacted, and paid homage to this story with a certain melodrama. That everyone was so caught up in the violent act of this execution that they left in tears whose purpose in some of these services was to interpret this story of execution as the death of God, the snuffing out of the light of goodness. Sometimes we even snuffed the light out. Because it had to be dark in order to wait for the triumphant return of this God on Easter morning. Now, those sad and melancholic observances are the result of centuries of theological, what I might call gymnastics, that the Christian church has done to layer this story with cosmic meaning, turning the tragic death of a respected and beloved leader into an opportunity to bring acclaim to a God who's in charge of it all. Don't worry, though death comes, God is in charge, has everything planned, controls the very destinies of life and death. Now, having said that, I'm not interested in that tonight. In this story of the systematic ending of a man and his teachings, we catch a glimpse of what it means to be committed to peace. We have to read this story with the eyes of an activist. We have the opportunity to learn in this story how we can bring our honest and raw humanity to the work of building peace. Not a feigned tear in our eye for a sad story, but our real, honest, and raw humanity. How we use even the most ruthless and awful challenges in our lives as building blocks to creating something else. Something new, something worth living for. So I want to go back to the beginning of this Friday story, or close to the beginning anyway. This group of friends who are confronted with a tense and anxiety-ridden night when they know that the authorities are coming to arrest Jesus. And in the crowds around them, so the story goes, like in any situation, I suppose, there was exhibited a whole range of emotions. There was denial that this could happen. There was wanting to retreat. There was wanting to fight. There was anger. There was acceptance, the whole gamut. So it's no surprise then when someone in the crowd pulled out a weapon and lashed out at those who would come for their leader, lash out with a violent act and slice at the guard's face or the assistant's face. And Jesus' response is telling. Perhaps we might say an embodiment of his entire teaching and ethic. He says those who take up the sword will certainly perish by the sword. That's really the premise behind all nonviolence. That aggression leads to more aggression. That fighting leads to want to train to fight better. That brutality on one side breeds brutality and retaliation. That seeing violent behavior normalizes it and births an affinity for it. Pick up a sword or a knife or a gun against another, and it births a cycle that it's awfully hard to break. Now, that narrative that Nancy read goes on beyond that short scene. It goes on toward Jesus' arrest and questioning and ultimately execution. But the same attitude continues. When accused of this or that or the other, in front of the authorities, Jesus, we're told, remains silent. I suspect that he knows what countless defense attorneys since know. That having the accused take the stand is risky business. He knows that in a corrupt system, there's no end to the way a suspect's words can be twisted to mean whatever the prosecution would like it to mean. And I love that there's a tiny hint that Jesus knows just whose system this is. Matthew puts these words in Jesus' mouth. Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you didn't lay a hand on me. But this is your hour. That's a really fascinating phrase. In my mind, that gets translated to, this is your show, right? It's your name's on the marquee. And since the fix was in before the questioning has even begun, isn't it far better to let your actions and your convictions speak for themselves? Here's what meaning I take. Let's not respond out of the heat of anger or a desperate ego, because there's peace in knowing that one is acting out of real passion. That one is living from the core of their desire for justice. We know people like this. At times we are people like this. To know the peace that when you don't sway from your rejection of being part of an exploitive system. Jesus knew what was at stake, it seemed. He'd be killed for those convictions. Rejecting an exploitive system, refusing to be a part of it, acting from the core of your desire for justice and peace, has consequences for us all. So even though we're all tempted, like that one in the group who got a bit sword happy, we're all tempted to deal with our anger in less than positive ways, there are other options in the service of peace and positive change. When Sinyarti shares his own experiences that have made him angry in his life, we're also, in some ways, I'm awed and amazed at his ability to take that anger and convert it into action. But it doesn't just take a Nobel laureate to be able to do those things. So many similar experiences are shared by those who've done both simple and amazing things, large and small. By her own account, Rosa Parks says that when she was on the bus that day, she was thinking about Emmett Till, a 14-year-old African-American who was brutally murdered by two white men in Mississippi in August of 1955. She was thinking about him and angered by it. Feeling fully that anger is when she refused to move, when she said she just couldn't move on that bus. Which sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, which in turn triggered a civil rights movement. We've all been angry at circumstances that present themselves to us. Just to speak a little bit personally for a minute. That went backwards. Over the past 2 years, I recognized this week that of all the emotions I felt over a minister colleague of ours in the United Church being declared unfit due to her theological views, which are no different in substance than my own, I have to recognize that of all the feelings I've felt, anger is up there at the top. They say the pen is mightier than the sword, but in all the letter writing, when results aren't seen, I confess I've been tempted to let anger fly a little more freely. Some of us, when confronted with what was felt as systemic racism in our Alberta justice system in dealing with Indigenous individuals, experienced anger. We've seen in the world, even just in these last couple of weeks, young people expressing their anger and calling for change. Just Wednesday, a protest at the U of A over a planned increase to fees and budget cuts was made all the more acute after the announcement of the university president's Canada-leading $800,000 plus 2016 salary, which results in things like
We want change! 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 We want change!
Forget the anger mixed with grief and outrage expressed by Florida student Emma Gonzalez. I've taken just 10 seconds of a clip here in which it was an early speech of Emma Gonzalez fairly soon after the Florida shooting, and her anger and outrage is palpable.
How about we stop blaming the victims for something that was the shooter's fault? The fault of the people who let him buy the guns in the first place, those at the gun shows, the people who encouraged him to buy accessories for his guns to make them fully automatic, the people who didn't take them away from him when they knew that he expressed homicidal tendencies. And I am not talking about the FBI. I am talking about the people that he lived with. I'm talking about the neighbors who saw him outside holding guns.
That anger that's right on the surface was converted not very many days later into a well-organized march, into measured and calm calls for change, into a movement that I think most of us can tell isn't over by any stretch. What have each of us come face to face with that has caused anger to flash? The point is this: like that night long ago when a ruling class and elite of civic and religious leaders wanted a quick condemnation to rid themselves of a troublemaker protester, a movement leader and a change initiator, there will always be required people to condemn the pulling out of swords and the turning to violence. This is the difference between what community organizer Ernie Cortez calls hot anger and cold anger. With hot anger, we act irrationally, he says, and misdirect it toward the wrong people. With cold anger, we focus on what we can do to change oppression, to change exploitation, to change injustice. I find that definition helpful. Because if we act on our hot anger, it's destructive. Not only to others, it's destructive to ourselves. It's often violent, it's dangerous. If we hold on to that hot anger too long, it begins to burn us from the inside out, cooking us resentment and hatred and destroying our inner well-being. But the opposite of that, maybe not the opposite of that, the conversion of that hot anger is something worth pursuing. It's not to become pushovers and doormats for the world's bullies and powermongers. But when we cool our anger down and turn it toward our focus on alternatives, on paths toward change, on productive ideas, on community responses, this becomes a path toward peace. Which in the great tradition of the Jesus wisdom is a total oxymoron. Positive, cold anger can be a path toward peace. It took those who wanted to learn more about Jesus' teachings and who formed communities and wanted to follow that way. It took them a long time, lifetimes. Maybe it takes all of us lifetimes to learn how to do just that. But then again, peace isn't a straight road. We'd do well to follow Satyarthi's advice. Let's get angry. Let's get the right kind of angry. Not the kind that's destructive and violent to others and ourselves, but the kind where the conviction of our ideas will help us find our way out of tonight and into a new day. Let's get the right kind of angry, not in some magical empty tomb or rising from the dead, but in the thoughtful and organized and beautiful action that is possible. That's where we'll find our way on this curvy path of peace, to the hope of Easter, and possibly every new thing awaiting us. On this Friday waiting for Sunday, on this anger waiting for an idea, may it be so in so many ways.
We gather on this day to nourish memory and strengthen our intention to live in ways that will bring hope and healing to our wounded world.
By acknowledging the wounds of the past and the pages of violence authored by humankind, we seek to create our future in a better way. We will not be satisfied with blaming the victim or playing the victim. We will not pretend that nothing is wrong.
We will not accept the excuses that have attempted to justify collusion, silence, and complacency, inhumanity, and atrocity. We refuse to accept cruelty and suffering as a path toward the good. We will not fail to seek a better way.
We will not be complicit with injustice, nor will we accept violence in silence. We will seek to speak and live in ways that disarm and bring peace and fairness.
We will stand with victims and seek to understand those who victimize. We will not settle for easy answers. We will work towards learning and living the wisdom of Jesus of Nazareth.
We will not use the life or death of Jesus to justify, condone, or excuse violence. The cross will remind us of the imperial intolerance of dissent and the crossroads where our convictions often take us.
We will refuse to see violence anywhere as an act of divine judgment, a holy war, or the will of any god.
We will seek to bring the light of our deepest convictions and compassion to outshine cowardice and violence. May we live these intentions each day in all the ways we are able. We pray in the hope of peace and the spirit of persevering love. This is a song that we'll sing together. We're going to sing it by you repeating after me. But there's some words on the screen just in case. I think what we need first is a bit of a beat. You could snap, you could tap, you could do whatever you like, but we need something that sounds a little like this. Just put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Now you. Just put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Now the whole thing. Just put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. If you're comfortable standing, I invite you to stand. Just put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Don't give up hope. Don't give up hope. You're not alone. You're not alone. Don't you give up. Don't you give up. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Just put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front
front of the other, and lead with love.
Lift up your eyes.
Lift up your eyes.
Don't you despair.
Don't you despair.
Look up ahead.
Look up ahead.
The path is there.
The path is there.
Just
Put one foot in front of the other, and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other, and lead with love.
I know you're scared.
I know you're scared,
And I'm scared too.
and I'm scared too.
But here I am.
But here I am,
Right next to you.
right next to you. Just put one foot in front of the other, and lead with love.
Put
One foot in front of the other, and lead with love.
and lead with
Love, and lead with love, and lead with love.
For our closing words, we offer these words of a Franciscan blessing. Your part is to respond with, "May it be so." May we be blessed with the discomfort of easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that we may live deep within our hearts. May it be so. May we be blessed with anger at injustice, oppression and exploitation of others, so that we may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May it be so. May we be blessed with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, and war, so that we may reach out our hands to comfort and bring joy. May it be so. And may we be blessed with enough foolishness to believe that we can make a difference in this world, so that we may do what others claim cannot be done. May it be so.
Sorrow